Shawn, you wrote an article. Another thing we were thinking about talking about was our Superflex draft. You wrote an article about it. When you went to write it up, or why you went to write it up, or the more you think about this Superflex draft that we had a lot of fun with, hopefully the listeners had a lot of fun with, that you're starting to like the team more, which was not the direction I thought that this would go, because I'm going to need you to explain to me why I should like the team. But we did a Superflex draft, and we more or less don't have any quarterbacks. We wound up taking 4. We wound up taking Geno Smith late. What did you find when you were writing it up, and what are your, you said you had kind of some additional thoughts from this draft?
Well, we had played around with the FFPC roster construction explorer before we started, and we knew that the 2 QBs early was a successful approach. That's pretty straightforward. All the star QBs are going in those early rounds. You need to have contributions from the 2 quarterbacks in Superflex. In this particular format, you essentially lose a starting spot from the rest of the players, which is easy to forget about, right? That Superflex position is not an additional position. It takes out one of the flexes. And so that knocks us down a little bit in terms of what we actually need at the other spots. And that's one of the reasons that this comment that you made about taking a lot of quarterbacks late, especially now that 2 rounds have been added back in, I think is an interesting comment. When you go and look, and one of the things here, Ben, I love this team right from the beginning, because number 1, it was fun, and number 2, it's unusual, and number 3, we drafted a lot of fun players. And so, I'm always going to be in on a team like that. But as we were going through it, one of the things I mentioned to you, and we were really joking about it on the show, was that if you go down into the not just small and not just tiny, but minuscule sample sizes, you find the teams that were drafted similarly had been very successful. One of the things that I wanted to do in the article was flesh that out a little bit more, focus specifically on our first 8 picks. So it's still a little bit of a surprise to readers, anybody who doesn't listen to Stealing Bananas, which obviously would be, well, we'll say it's a mistake on their part, but they don't know that we actually then did get Marcus Mariota in round 9. But focusing on this initial portion, you can actually go and look at the Superflex Classic to see, well, did it work to wait at QB and to take more QBs? And the reason I say you can kind of go look there is that format is going to be more favorable for our approach. And so if there's a format that's more favorable for what we did, and you go and look and find out that it doesn't work there, then, you're going to be a little bit disappointed that you approached it that way. But now, especially that the 2 rounds have been added, if you remove sort of the kicker defense tactics from the Classic, you're going to have a format that starts to really converge with the slim best ball tournament. Long story short, if you do what we did, you take that 1 QB relatively early, you get sort of a guy that you can count on, and whether or not Justin Fields is that guy is a topic of another conversation. But then you wait until after the 8th round, you actually come back with a win rate of 10% and the highest average score of the variety of QB builds that people would generally do, right? So that doesn't conclusively answer the question, but especially given the fact that Mariota has this scenario where he could come through. I think for me, that's the key, right? When you're drafting in this range, and the other kind of big takeaway from the article is essentially that one of the reasons why you need to take the QBs early in Superflex is that it's Superflex, but the other reason you need to take them early is that it really follows the same basic concept that we see in other best ball leagues, which is that you need to take your QBs in the window. As soon as you move out of the early rounds in a Superflex, then you're out of that window. Once you're out of the window, you have to wait and then gamble on a contingency-based play as opposed to simply taking a bad quarterback who's going to start. And I like the fact that we ended up with Mariota and then subsequently Kenny Pickett. And then I don't know how excited we could be about Geno Smith, but either at the time that we were actually doing the draft or right afterward, there was news suggesting that Geno is in front in this race. I had said that I thought that he was. I had read that several weeks ago. Then there had been these comments about, no, Drew Lock is a better fit for the offense. He's more mobile. And I'm thinking, there are no comparisons between Russell Wilson and Drew Lock for me. So there's nothing like you're going to be able to run the offense more in a more similar fashion because you have Drew Lock as opposed to Geno Smith. That's just simply, I mean, it's just simply not true or relevant. But so we get this news that Geno Smith may be out in front. Also, still, I mean, Baker Mayfield is going to be the starting quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks. So I guess that part of it bums me out a little bit about the 19th round pick. But big picture, thoughts on that? I mean, I think there is room for enthusiasm.
I love the way you just laid out that once you get through sort of the target window for this position, it's true at a variety of positions, a variety of different points in drafts. Those things can change year over year, but they are similar for the most part. We were joking on the show, and you used it in your article, this idea of we were sort of into the QB dead zone at a certain point, but then, we can obviously talk about the running back dead zone, similar to how the quarterbacks are going to play out in Superflex, where there's a lot of quarterbacks going early. And then once you get out of basically like the third round, you're kind of screwed. There's no quarterback. And then the worst thing you can do is take a quarterback that is tiers below the guys that already went and chase those points that you're not going to be able to match with whoever you take. I mean, we may have already done that with Justin Fields in the late third with the way that the Bears offense looks, as much as I love Justin Fields. But that's just a broad lesson that I think is super applicable across positions, across various formats, no matter what type of league you're playing, what have you. It is clear when you're drafting. Anyone who's done any number of fantasy drafts understands this. It's clear when you're in a window where there's a lot of good options at a certain position. And it's clear when you see like a run start to go and that window starts to close. And you get that question when you're on the clock of, should I chase this? Do I think this player is still in that window? And sometimes you can make a positive case that player is still in that window and you're getting into the end of that run. Maybe it makes sense. Other times it's pretty clear that the player's not in that window, but you still feel that temptation that if I don't take this player here, there's nothing else behind him. And it's the best that I can do at this point. And what you just laid out was how much smarter it is then to wait and to keep waiting and then to find contingency-based plays if you have to. Yes, the probability that Marcus Mariota, Kenny Pickett, and Geno Smith are going to solve our quarterback questions is very low. But at least we continued in those earlier picks to build enough firepower and upside at running back, receiver, and tight end that if that really low probability outcome hits, we still have a roster that can win. It can only win if we can get competent quarterback points, but that was going to be the case regardless. And you can lose the draft there by chasing quarterbacks into the 5th and 6th round. You can lose your drafts by chasing running backs into the running back dead zone. Most years, it's shifting a little bit this year, obviously. We've talked about that. You can lose your draft trying to think that you're going to solve the wide receiver depth equation with a bunch of 12th and 13th and 14th round wide receivers, and not understanding that wide receiver isn't actually a deep position, right? Tight end, a lot of years, it's been similar where you have some elite names at the top, and then that next group of tight ends sort of get pulled up because drafters don't want to wait 4 or 5 rounds before they take the tight end 4 or the tight end 5 or the tight end 6. And so you get these guys pushed up and then they wind up in a range where probably they're not on their own merits worth that pick. They don't have enough of an upside case to be a differentiator at the tight end position. We see this in all positions. And I don't know, I just thought that was a really probably the most crucial thing you said in that entire point, which there was a lot of really good specific stuff about this team, but I think that is so universal to any kind of drafting. Fantasy football, any other fantasy sports, any kind of draft you might do. When you get that temptation and you know it, like you're like, the kid with the hand in the cookie jar where you're like, I'm doing something that doesn't make sense. I still see people send me drafts and be like, I know I wasn't supposed to do this, but it made sense here. And here's why. And like people love to say that. It's like, well, no, you knew you weren't supposed to do it. And one of the things you should realize is it's typically better to understand that feeling is there for a reason and keep pushing that. And even though you think that there's not going to be another quarterback that's going to be available to you, taking some random upside swing late is better than playing into, really poor value in the 5th round when you draft Davis Mills or whoever we could have drafted in the 5th round,
And so the other thing that allowed us to do was to take Christian McCaffrey, and he was the player we had wanted last season when we were getting these, 110, 111. That actually was very fortunate for us. We got lucky. We missed all of those injured shares, but now we have a player who can score just an insane number of points to start out this build, which again is in a tournament. And one of the fun things about this tournament is it has 4,752 entries. So it's kind of an intimate tournament to where if some of these scenarios that we've talked about play out within the context of the other players, I mean, you're talking about not just winning your league, but feeling like you at least have a shot to see your name on that final 10 leaderboard as we head toward the end of the season. We have Christian McCaffrey. We selected Jamar Chase. Then we got Darren Waller. Ben, we had your favorite player there, and AJ Brown. We selected Jalen Waddle, J.K. Dobbins, Ken Walker. One of the other things I really like about this draft within this format that essentially loses a starting position, and then there may be weeks where we're playing a non-QB in the Superflex, so maybe we need to not talk about losing a starting position on our particular team, but we have that foundation tight end. We have that foundation running back. We know that in FFPC leagues, those things are helpful. We have the wide receiver depth and firepower that we're looking for. I mean, it's sort of inevitable if you fade QB in a super flex draft that you're going to look at the rest of your team and say, oh, I like the rest of my team, but we do like the rest of our team here.
Yeah, like you said, is going to be inevitable. You get a lot more opportunity. I mean, this is one of the fun things about Superflex when quarterbacks are actually going in large numbers, throughout the draft. It's the other reason that tight end premium is such a enticing format. People get caught up in, why are we giving extra points for a tight end just catching a pass? It's like, well, I mean, we're playing a game. You know what I mean? We're playing a stupid game about a game. And what that means for the strategy of the game is that tight ends are now going to go higher. And when tight ends go higher, that means that you're going to get, fewer running back and receiver picks between each of your picks. And especially when you're sitting at 111, like we were, because we love to pick at the end of a round, you get this element where you actually get to pick players that you like instead of having 20 picks between your picks and the inevitability that you're either have to overdraft the guy by 15 picks or he's definitely going to go. Sometimes that guy makes it all the way back to you in these types of formats. So it's a lot more fun when there's balance across a lot of different positions. And we did, have more optionality across various positions at each of our picks. And in choosing not to take quarterback, naturally you're going to be very deep at receiver. We're taking AJ Brown in the 5th round. I mean, anytime you can do that, you're going to win your league.